I felt sad. I felt, bad. Like, why? Why are these souls? Why are these people? Why are these energies, on this pyre? This was one of the hardest parts of my NDE, that I had to spend a lot of time doing, healing. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I doing here? Why am I here? As soon as the presence enters the hell realm, I immediately knew that I was safe. I knew that the presence was there for me, that that presence recognized me and knew exactly who I was. And this figure took me out of the hell realm. And next thing I know, I'm in this beautiful waiting room, which was the waiting room to heaven. I'm watching all these souls coming and going from this waiting room. And I just remember this figure, this presence that was with me the whole time. I did find out specifically that that was Archangel Raphael. And so I was given the opportunity to be able to come back to Earth. And my message is that it's a graduation. The soul gets to graduate from the human journey, and that we go into this very expanded, all-knowing state. We get to go into this omnipresence, graduating to this higher part of our soul is really what death is. So it's a great gift.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
I'm here with Yoga Premananda. She's a healer and she had an incredible near-death experience she wants to share. Hello, Yoga. How are you?
Hello, AJ. Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm really excited to talk about my NDE.
Can you begin telling us about that day when you had your NDE? What happened?
It actually started out at about midnight. I had done speed or crystal meth, amphetamine. At midnight, I did some crystal meth and I left Los Angeles. I was driving on a 2-lane road to Las Vegas. There's probably a lot of people watching this that have driven from LA to Las Vegas. It's a very common path to drive this 2-lane road that goes literally through the middle of the desert, the middle of nowhere. There's almost no civilization to be found for a good stretch of that 4-hour car ride. And I was about 3 hours into my car ride. And so the crystal meth, for about the first 3 hours, I was on this crystal meth and I was elated. My windows were down, the wind was blowing through the car, the radio was cranked up, I was singing, I was just in this absolute elation from the drug. And so at 3 a.m., so 3 hours into the drive, all of a sudden, I did this 180 shift. All of a sudden, I had this feeling of dread. It felt like my heart gave out. And all of a sudden, it felt like my lungs collapsed and I could not breathe. I could not get any air whatsoever into my lungs, and I started to die while I was driving. Now, at this point, my car went off the road. I had a car crash. I remember my legs being crushed underneath the steering wheel, and I had a death experience. So during my death experience, I rose up out of my body, and I found myself immediately in this realm, which was like hell. There was an actual pyre of spinning flames. I saw the flames coming off of this pyre, and I also saw bodies hanging off of the pyre, and these bodies were screaming for help. I saw the arms reaching out for help. I saw their faces screaming, and I'm standing there on the side of this pyre as it's spinning, and I'm watching the pyre. I noticed how dark it was. I felt very jarred. It was very jarring because the souls that were hanging off the pyre of spinning flames, I remember vividly their facial expressions. To this day, it feels so vivid. I have such a remembrance of even like the way the arms were hanging out of the fire, the way this thing was spinning. I feel like I could smell almost like a smoky smell in that space. There was a dark figure, which I couldn't see. It was like a shadow off to the corner of the room. It was a room. And so inside this room, it felt like a room. There was no ceiling. It felt like this room had an infinite amount of space that went up above the room. It was all dark except for the beautiful red flames. I have to say the red flames did look beautiful. The color of the flames looked beautiful, but then there was this dark, eerie essence to, of course, the bodies and the souls that were in there, you know, crying for help. So it was, I could say that, like, I didn't necessarily feel fear, but I felt like in the pit of my stomach, it was like this, almost like a disgust. Like I felt disgusted for the energy that was in the room. I felt sad. I felt, you know, bad. Like, why are these souls? Why are these people? Why are these energies, you know, on this pyre? Why isn't anybody helping them? So I'm happy that I wasn't in fear. And at the same time, this was one of the hardest parts of my NDE, that I had to spend a lot of time doing, you know, healing. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And as I had that thought, all of a sudden, that's when this presence that I could actually see, this very tall figure, but it had on, interestingly enough, it had on glasses, almost like a fedora hat and a long trench coat. As soon as the presence enters the hell realm, I immediately knew that I was safe. Once that recognition was there, I felt like I recognized the presence. I knew that the presence was there for me, that presence recognized me and knew exactly who I was. And this figure took me out of the hell realm. And next thing I know, I'm in this beautiful waiting room, which was the waiting room to heaven. And I remember this really long tunnel. And I was sitting on a bench in the tunnel watching souls. I'm watching all these souls coming and going from this waiting room. And I just remember this figure, this presence that was with me the whole time. So for me, that was probably one of the most fun parts of the NDE, is getting to experience this natural essence of our soul, where we have these immediate recognitions with people. You know, on the level of the soul, we can immediately arrive in any essence or any place, any state of being that we want to be in, even here on earth. So, so getting up to the waiting room of heaven, so having all of this immediate recognition with these souls, it felt like all these souls were coming and going through that area. I just remember feeling a presence. So the whole entire time I was in the waiting room, I felt like I was being elated. I was being lifted up. I felt like I was being brought to a state that I was supposed to be this lifetime. So it's like I felt like I was finally achieving and receiving what I was meant to receive. I felt like I was meant to have this energy and everything that was coming towards me in that realm. So it felt very natural. It felt very happy. It felt very safe. Got to experience this part of myself. These souls looked like balls of energy. So it was like seeing all these different balls of energy and, you know, all this information. I could see that each person was receiving different types of wisdom and downloads. So it was like the information was like crystal clear, which was really interesting. I remember looking down the hallway and having a lot of information. I'm not sure exactly how I had so much information about this hallway, about the time that I was spending here in the waiting room. I knew that I was not meant to go to the end of the hallway, so I didn't even try to walk around the area. I knew that I wanted to stay exactly where I was. Some of the immediate information that was given to me in that realm, some of it came through immediately in my near-death experience, and then some of it over the course of 10 to 15 years of me doing really deep inner work, where I was able to get more and more details about this. So in essence, every single one of my energy centers in my body was being imprinted with information from the space. I did find out specifically that that was Archangel Raphael. And so I was given the opportunity to be able to come back to Earth and to be given a major upgrade when it comes to health and healing and being able to transform the body from the inside out on a biological level. Lots of information about DNA that I have, lots of information about how DNA passes from lifetime to lifetime, how to break these cycles, how they tie in with basically everything that we choose to do when we're in our human incarnation. And so it was interesting because as this information was being imprinted on me, it just felt like the imprinting felt like light air. It just felt like all this air and this light was imprinted into my physical body. So there was this like regenerative like essence or feeling. The most interesting thing too was that my soul, when I was in the waiting room of heaven, started communicating with a couple of the other souls that were there. And this was a really key factor in my near-death experience, because having this immediate recognition with a couple of the souls that were coming and going, when I did come back to my body and after my NDE, when I was back on Earth, living my human incarnation, I actually met some of those souls. There's a woman named Dr. Sarah Larson. She lives in Los Angeles. And after my NDE, when I met her in person, I immediately knew that she was one of the souls that I had met in the waiting room of heaven. And her and I wound up having a conversation, and she told me, oh yeah, I had a near-death experience when this, and this. And immediately I had this recognition with her. And I said, oh, I met you during my near-death experience. We met in the waiting room of heaven. And that happened to me with a couple of other people so I feel like one of the most beautiful things about NDEs is that when we're encountering, for some of us that encounter other souls, and when I went to a meeting at IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, I went to one of their meetings and people were getting up on stage talking about their near-death experiences. One of the women that got on stage, she said that during her near-death experience, she actually met a soul. And when she came back from her near-death experience, they connected. He was living in another country. She was living in the US. They connected on this Facebook support group site, and they wound up getting married. They met during their near-death experience on the other side. And then they decided to get married when they came back from their near-death experience. And now they are married and living in Hawaii. So the amount of souls that connect during a near-death experience, I believe that heaven and God and the angels set it up that way, because as we come back from our near-death experiences, we actually need each other. We are like pieces of a puzzle, and we help each other piece together so many different pieces and aspects of our near-death experience, which helps us be able to gain access to the gifts and the wisdom that come into us, into our physical bodies, into these different aspects of our gifts and our lives from our near-death. And I know that now that I've done such deep work on, Archangel Raphael in particular, I can see why there's this bigger essence and energy of him and his teachings on the planet for health and rejuvenation. But these big balls of energy, I still see people as balls of energy. Like with the gifts that I have, the gifts that I was able to bring back, I see balls of energy. It's, so I can see all the information inside people's bodies and the essence that someone is dealing with. And there's always this connection back. It's like a umbilical cord that goes from everybody up to their essence, their higher angelic being, their higher essence, and see all that information pouring down. So this is the aspect of everyone that can really channel through that information that is for them from this area, from this place in time and space that exists, which is connected to a very high source. At this point, I remember lots and lots of information coming to me. I knew that I was going back to Earth. And at that time, that's when I felt like a part of me stayed there. A part of me stayed there in that beautiful space where I was, where I felt safe and secure. And the thing that I remembered the most is the presence that took me there, the presence that had me there in this space. I remember the beautiful white, brilliant light, the brightness of the space. And so later on, after I was able to go back and do a lot of healing around this area, I had way more information. And my memory finally came out about more details about what happened in this space, which I can get into later. But at that time, I came back into my physical body. And when I was back in my physical body, the car was no longer crashed. I was back in the car, and I had this voice that told me to turn my car around and to drive back to Los Angeles. I don't know how at that point that this all happened. It had to be an absolute miracle, because at that point I could barely function. It was like my lungs were collapsed. I really was such a mess, and I really felt like something else besides me was driving my car. Something else was driving my physical body back to Los Angeles. Yes. So, okay. So when I was driving back from my NDE, my major confusion, it was horrible. So my whole 3-hour drive back to my apartment in LA, the whole time my body was breaking down. I was, my lungs were collapsing. I could barely take a breath. I was crying the entire 3 hours. I was shaking, and I could feel there was this other presence in my hands actually driving the car. So I knew that I was at that point being guided, and I had to get to the point where I just relaxed and surrendered. I had to surrender to this being, this large being that was with me and guiding my life at that point. So, some people come back from an NDE and they're fully healed and they're ready to go. I was not. I was in the worst case scenario, health-wise, mentally, emotionally, and physically. I was as bad as you can get. So it was like just dealing with lung failure, a massive drug overdose, not being able to function. And this presence literally got me back to my apartment in Los Angeles. And it was very interesting. For 7 days, I didn't see anyone or speak to anyone. So for that 7 days, I pulled into my driveway, I went into my apartment, and I shut off my phone, and I didn't see or speak to anyone for about 7 days. And during that 7 days, I was being worked on. I was being put into, who and how I am right now. So much information was being downloaded in my body. And what I found out, I wanted help to heal my body. I had a laundry list of ailments, and I wanted help to heal my body. And that did not come in the form of actual human help. So this presence guided me each and every day for 2 years. So every day for 2 whole years, I heard this voice that was guiding me and said, read this book, research this, go to this place and receive this healing, go live here and spend time to, so for every day for 2 years, Archangel Raphael guided my life and taught me how to heal my body. And I did not realize that I was being trained. I was being trained by the angels. I was being trained by God on how to heal the physical body completely naturally. There was this very intense period of time where I was studying all the supplements, reading all the books. I wound up getting all these trainings. It took me a very long time to heal. It took me about 3 years to actually feel quote unquote normal again. And then I always had this confusion because I had 2 memories running. I had a full-on memory of a car crash, and then I had a memory of coming back into my body where my car was not crashed, and then driving back. 10 years after that happened, I was still seeking answers to why I had 2 memories. I was not telling many people about that at all. I didn't want people to think I was crazy. And finally, I went to see Bashar, Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar, and I was chosen in the crowd, and I got up and I asked him why I had these 2 memories. And Bashar, through Daryl Anka, thank you to Daryl, told me that I actually had the car crash, that memory is valid. I'm not crazy. My car crashed, but that the angelic realm was able to rewind time and space. So the angelic realm decided, since nobody was in the middle of the desert, I was literally alone. There wasn't even a coyote there to witness my car crash. So the angels actually rewound my car crash, rewound time and space, put me back in the car and guided me back to Los Angeles. So when I finally got my answer, when Daryl said those words, I felt this immediate relief. I felt so much healing took place in my body, on my cellular level, on my DNA level. And at that moment, not only did it heal my car crash, I looked back since the time I was born, because I always wondered, why was I born into the family that I was born into? Why was I born into so much trauma and abuse and, all of these life challenges that I felt like I was trying to get over? And I actually healed so much of that by Bashar telling me about this car crash, because I saw every single point in time where God and the angels were with me, and they were protecting me, and they were guiding me, and they were healing me, not only for my NDE, but for lifetimes. I feel like for lifetimes I've been with God and the angels, and having this really special connection and being able to find myself over and over again. So grateful to the powerful channels that do the work that they do. Why did I first go to the hell realm? I know that now I know that not everybody goes into this realm of hell during an NDE. And I've spoken to a lot of people that have had hell experiences. And there's been a lot of people like me that it's taken them a long time to reconcile what this part of their NDE meant. Why did I go to this hell realm? And what happened to those souls? And who was this dark figure in the room? So there was a lot of reconciling and reflection that brought me to, which now I'm grateful for because of the amazing wisdom that actually came out of this space.
Did you start sharing your story with other people, your family, and how did they react?
My friends were amazing. I immediately got into meditation groups. I immediately got into energy healing study and training and certifications. I surrounded myself with people that could care about me and for me and help me grow and learn to make the most out of this experience. When it came to my family, they never really, recognized or had an acknowledgement of what had happened to me. So it was interesting. I think that they're not meant to be on that journey with me. I believe that as light workers, there's always one light worker that incarnates specifically into a family to help uplift that generational wounding. So I just feel that I am the light worker that incarnated within my family to uplift the generational wounding of my family. So I think, it's such a beautiful way to relieve ourselves of needing acknowledgement or validation or recognition from a family member. If we get it, that's great. But if we don't get it, I don't think that's the purpose of our journey. Our journey is not meant to get validation and recognition from our family. We have our soul family for that. And we have our guides, our spirit family. We have God and the angels. That's where we really get our recognition from. Our soul's purpose comes online, when we choose to connect with our soul family.
How did this change your life and how did you get into healing?
Yeah, so the miracles, so this changed my life. But after my near-death experience, I had no addiction whatsoever. So I went from, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, even things like drinking coffee every day. I became a holistic healer. I became an organic vegan, which is not for everybody. I don't preach any one way because we're all very unique. I think it's important for us to embrace our uniqueness. But one of the biggest miracles that I had, didn't have a single addiction or a single impulse towards anything that was toxic or unhealthy. I became a detox coach. I have all the information necessary to detox someone's body naturally. Being able to help wean people off of medications and pharmaceuticals and really empower people in their own health and healing. It's literally as if someone themselves went up to the gates of heaven and received healing from the archangels. So that's a miracle, being able to provide that not only for myself for 10, 15, 20 years afterwards, healing my near-death experience, but now being able to provide that for others that are seeking that, and a complete personality change. It was like all my traumas and carrying around this heavy baggage that I was carrying. So finally, I felt supported. I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt like I knew I was on the path that I was supposed to be on. I was out of the matrix. I was out of that, the hamster wheel of life. So there's just, being able and finding this framework, just, being able to do the work that I do now. So many miracles. Self-love, I think, is also a a big miracle in itself, really being able to find this aspect of ourselves, to have unconditional love with our journey, and knowing that it doesn't mean anything about ourselves. When we go through the dark nights of the soul, it's a gift. It's a privilege to go through a dark night of the soul. It's a privilege to have a human incarnation. Even if somebody doesn't have a plan of their soul to go through an enlightening journey this lifetime, it's still a privilege to go through a human journey from start to finish. So there's no judgments. The judgments are gone. There's no hierarchies. There's no, nothing in the way of, oneness and just coming into oneness with our humanity that we each have.
How is your life today, and how do you help others?
Yeah, so I actually created a 9-month online program, and it's called Phoenix, Rise and Rebirth Your Legacy, because I feel that anyone that's gone through a near-death experience, I break it down into 2 different types of near-death experience. There is a typical near-death experience like we're talking about, and then there's a non-typical near-death experience, which I know you often talk about. The non-typical near-death experience. That's like going through a divorce. That's like having a health challenge, going through a dark night of the soul, dealing with betrayal, even environmental non-typical near-death experiences is like going through a hurricane or a tornado, things that scare people and the fear of death arises within them. Well, that intense fear of death that arises within people, that actually triggers the near-death-like state. And so all those same gifts are available to those people. So I've set up this framework so that people can go through this 9-month journey and really rise and rebirth the legacy that is within them. Because what I've found out over the last 22 years of healing my near-death experience is that there's so many gifts inside of people that are waiting to come out. And that is the main catalyst of a typical or non-typical near-death experience, is the perfect opening that God gives people in order to really get the gifts that are within them. So yeah, setting up this framework so people can go through this 9-month journey to really have that experience for themselves. And so my website is consciousbreakthrough.com, and I'm on YouTube and across the social media platforms under my name, which is Yoga Premananda.
What is your message for people who are afraid of death or recently experienced the death of a loved one?
Yes. So my message, without sounding callous, my message is that it's a graduation. The soul gets to graduate from the human journey, and that we go into this very expanded, all-knowing state. We get to go into this omnipresence. So I feel it's important to learn to breathe. If somebody's at the end of their life, it's important to be able to just breathe and relax, just like I had to surrender in the car when I was driving. I was in a lot of pain, and as soon as I surrendered that there was this greater force driving my car, so I feel like there is just the knowing that surrendering to death, surrendering to the expansion, surrendering to us graduating to this higher part of our soul is really what death is. So it's a great gift.
Any final message?
I just want to say thank you, AJ. You have done the most beautiful work in this space of near death and the books you've written. And I know you even interviewed the beautiful, the father of near death experience, Dr. Moody. So thank you for all of that. I really appreciate your work.
This has been the AJ Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.